Welcome to our show today. This is Parenting Today, real life, real people, real faith. I'm Mary Hassan, your host for today, along with my co-host, Mikey Hill. We are talking with our guest, Dr. Ray Guarendi. Dr. Ray is a very incredible person who I'm thrilled that you're joining us here. Dr. Ray is a clinical psychologist. He's a father of 10. He's a radio commentator and an author and frequent speaker. Dr. Ray, you're eminently qualified to speak about many things with us, but today we're going to be focusing on anger. And this can be quite a problem for many of us, but even within our society. And Mikey, I believe you had some statistics that...
Yeah, we went, how reliable these are, but we went on, did a little research. Anger is a real issue, and some of it is hidden, some of it is overt. Absences from work, 65% of them are due to stress from anger. 30% of men are grossly unhappy at work. 1 out of every 3, that's a lot for me. 45% of Americans, men and women, lose their temper on a regular basis. Now, I actually tried to go in a little deeper and see what regular meant. Is that throughout the day, many times a day? Is it every week? But even just the word regular, 45% of Americans, men and women, lose their temper on a regular basis. 1 in 20 Americans, has had a fight, an all-out fight with their next door neighbor. I find that unbelievable. I mean, at least keep up a good front in the neighborhood. The last one, and again, you can address these, 1 in 4 admit to having committed road rage.
It sounds like we're drowning as a culture in anger. Why? What's at the root of this?
We are the richest culture the world has ever seen. We are the most well-fed culture the world has ever seen. We are the most comfortable and materialistically fluffed culture the world has ever seen. We are not really threatened by anybody at this point, leaving aside the whole terrorism thing. And yet, those statistics point to a boiling discontent that other cultures would look at us and say, how could you be so agitated?
You have so much.
Yes. And the reason is, one of the best definitions of anger I ever heard. Anger is the difference between the way it is and the way you want it to be.
I knew you were going to say that. That's
not the way it should,
true.
So let's not
But the way
confuse
you
this
want
with
it
our
to be.
goals and our commitment.
The way you want it to be. My father got up every day at 5:30 for 43 years and worked in a factory. He went in to a place that was loud, smelly, noisy, and 100 degrees in the wintertime.
Wow.
He missed no days of work the last 13 years before he retired. Did my father ever complain about going to work? Not much. He was real grateful to have a job. Did my father ever make over $24,000 in a year? He did not. But he sent his 4 children to college. Pop had every reason by today's standards to be disgruntled and unhappy over his existence. He wasn't. And the reason was he came to it with a different expectation.
Right.
In America, we are hammered with things should go the way we want them to go.
Well, isn't that what we sort of cultivate even in our children? We want to yield to their every desire and whim.
Be the way I want it. My boss should be the way I want him to be. The time that I work should be the way I want it to be.
The commute should be the way I want it.
It should be exactly the way I want it to be. The person on the road should drive the way I want them to drive on the road. They shouldn't make mistakes. They shouldn't be foolish. My wife should talk to me the way she should talk to me. My mother-in-law should treat me with respect. I should have that particular house. I can't believe I have the house I have when that house is sitting there.
I'm getting angry about it.
All of it
can
just
feel it
relentlessly assaults us with, you deserve this.
Right.
Whether it's created in our own mind, whether it's created because of our media advertising culture, we are bombarded with the idea that everything should be as we want it.
Well, let me address to a psychologist, then are we labeled then a deeply narcissistic culture?
Oh my!
So I mean, as a culture, I mean, this is pathologically...
We are so self-absorbed. Incredibly self-absorbed. Now there is a certain, okay, I don't want to digress too far from this, but there is a certain personality type to Americans. They're personable. Americans are kind of outgoing people. They're much more outgoing than, say, other cultures. And they're friendly. and they are talkative. And of course, that drifts into assertive abrasiveness. You know, the
New Yorkers and New Jersey.
yeah, the
oh,
cliche of the American tourist.
She's on
Is
thin
the
ice
bread
right
fresh? Why isn't the bread fresh?
Right.
That kind of aggressive sort of American style. But that aside, the anger emanates from a deeper view of life. I want it to go the way I want it to go.
I.
Yes. I'll share with you how powerful thoughts are. Let's assume that you're at a bus stop. It's raining and the wind is blowing in on you, and it's a cold, bone-chilling rain. Everybody's trying to get underneath this little shelter. You're all packed in like sardines, and you're feeling pain in the back of your leg, on your calf. It's like, ow, ow. Clearly, somebody is taking the point of an umbrella and jabbing you in the back of the legs, okay? Now stop the camera. At that point, if I would say, Mikey, Mary, why are you so angry? What would you say?
I got an umbrella in my leg.
Somebody's poking me with umbrella, right?
Right.
All right. You can't take it anymore. You turn around. It's an elderly woman that's blind with a cane trying to hold her balance against this pressing crowd.
Changes your expectation.
What happened to your anger?
Yeah, it's gone.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. You told me you were angry because you were getting poked.
Right.
You're still getting poked. It wasn't the poke.
Right.
It was your interpretation of
Of
that.
the poke.
Yeah.
There's the difference. We interpret things certain ways that create feelings, that create anger. For example, my wife should have been here a half an hour ago. Where is she? I'm waiting. She said she was coming. She's not showing up. I'm getting tired of this. I'm spending half my life waiting for her. So by the time she gets here, I'm agitated. Now, God help her if that's the real reason that she was just being rude and then she's going to get it from me. But what if there was some other reason?
Right.
You see, my anger was fomented by my perception.
Right.
She's doing this to me. She's rude. She's not taking into account my time, my needs, my wants. But you see, it's all up here. Now, not all. We're all wired different. Some people
But
are
the
more prone
lion's
to
share of
anger
it.
than others.
Okay, let me throw something else out. I was at a talk recently where a psychologist was talking about the need to forgive and how anger often prevents us from doing that, and especially dealing with children, the need to look beyond the instantaneous emotional reaction of anger and to see that instead as sort of a mask that you need to drop and say, what's underneath it? And that oftentimes anger is a mask we wear. These were her words, but it made sense. A mask we wear to cover fear or disappointment or hurt. So that oftentimes when someone seems like they're angry about something, if you can get them to stop reacting in anger and probe that a little bit, you can see, wait a minute, maybe there's something that's under here. Maybe and the psychologist used an example of a boy who was in a cafeteria. And he was a boy who had some behavioral issues, but he was in a cafeteria and he was carrying his tray. And he slipped on something and dropped his tray. His response was to be angry at everyone around him. But what was going on?
He was embarrassed.
He was embarrassed. And she said that was the kind of situation where to deal with him, to help him learn not anger management, but rather to just identify, hey, wait a minute, you don't have to act in anger. Just realize you're embarrassed. How can you deal with your embarrassment in a healthier way?
Same thing. It's the thoughts. Embarrassment is still a feeling. It's still a perception, so to speak. So what was it about his perception? All these people are looking at me. All these people are laughing at me. I look like an idiot. I'm really stupid. No girl's ever going to talk to me. Why does this always happen to me? I can't believe this happened to me, and any of you are staring at me. I hate you for staring at me. All these thoughts. But it's interesting. Your psychologist friend may be touching upon two different levels of anger. One is that seething kind of always discontent, unhappy, on edge, and I have brief moments of contentment, but for the most part, I'm just an angry person.
Okay.
The other is the emotional reactivity
Okay.
that we all go through for certain events. I focus in therapy on my clients with the same technique that a lot of therapists use. It's called rational emotive therapy. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy. Neuro-linguistic programming. You restructure their thinking. For example, the boy, you might go at, what is it that is so awful about being embarrassed? What are you thinking? What are you telling yourself about this whole episode that makes you immediately wanting to crawl into a hole and get out of it? And since you couldn't crawl into a hole, you fought back. We got to identify what this is. Routinely, when somebody gets out of proportionately angry, you look for, what's the thing here? What's going on here?
underneath
What was the
there?
process
Is
underneath?
it?
Yeah.
For the woman to get totally angry if her husband says, you know, honey, I think you got on him a little bit. Oh, you think I got on? And then the question then becomes, how did she interpret what he just said? She heard him say, you're really an incompetent mother, you know, and that's just another sign of how incompetent you are and how you're going to damage our children if you don't back off.
Right. Which maybe he had said to her before, or
And he's gone, all I said
Right.
was maybe you just got on him a little bit. And
Right.
that's part of what you do to reduce anger. You get perceptions more accurate.
it's always comes back to living in the truth and living in the reality that God wants for us and God is creative for us.
But you've
instead
got
of
to
our
be
imagined.
willing to get out of your own reality. There's the problem.
But I also think, and help me like even process this for myself and all of us here in the audience. Sometimes this anger can go back to something last week, last month.
Oh, yeah, if you're a
It can-
girl, you remember that stuff. My wife's
but not
telling
even-
me
no,
stuff
but-
from 22 years ago.
But I'm saying
on
not
Tuesday.
even the girls who can remember, but all of a sudden you're not aware and you haven't identified that, you know, I always had this great view of my childhood, my upbringing, but now that you think of it, my dad really was sharp-tongued with me. Now that you think of it, Mom never really had time for me, and it was all about, you know, the League of Women Voters. It was all about, you know, and so little by little, can we help ourselves and others go through? Let's keep going back and back and back to see that maybe this struck at something that you thought was precious.
It did, but if you take it out even further, where is the perception that your mother should be a good mother?
It gets back to your original
Right.
premise.
It would be nice if she would have been, and it would be great, and that's certainly an ideal. But this notion that I didn't have a warm, loving mother, therefore I got ripped off, and therefore
It's
I'm
the
going to
should
be...
expectation.
Yes, there it is. There's the gap. And much of the time, that's past stuff that you can't do anything
change
about.
it.
There's nothing
Right.
you can do, but people are clinging to the I got ripped off mentality, and that breeds in them kind of a seething resentment.
So the way you deal with that, or the way if someone identifies that in themselves, is to look and realize what the reality is. Did you have a right to that expectation? Was that realistic? Was that
That's right.
legitimate?
Did you
And
have a
if
right
not-
to it? Most things we don't have a right to, by the way.
Well,
There's the-
it was at St. John of the Cross. The only thing we have a right to is our right to our cross, and that's it. So if we take the Catholic perspective of picking up our cross, we have a right to nothing. We don't have a right to receive communion once. We don't have a right to our redemption. So that perspective then puts this anger in its place.
If we could flip a switch and think like that, I mean, truly think like
Right,
that,
right.
truly think like that, I don't know what percentage of our anger and emotional reactivity would go away. I got to believe it's over 50, 60, 80% of it would just would go away.
Right.
But that's that never-ending struggle.
But
to
you
think
talked
that
about
way.
Socrates, though. Then maybe let's be practical now. Maybe we work on flipping that switch. You know, we're all athletes. If you're lifting X amount of pounds and you want to get up to here, you're going to each day lift 10 pounds more, 10 pounds more, and after 90 days, you are lifting your achieved goal. I mean, you've achieved your weight, your lift goal. Well, can we do the same athleticism in cultivating virtue or conquering this anger? Can we flip this switch and make our prayer life, make our, you know, our time as a family, our time as a community, wherever we are, as a church here in you know, globally even, maybe we need to plug more into redemption. I mean, clearly flipping the switch is going to solve
Yeah,
everything.
But I don't know, Mikey, that you
So
can
can we do it?
muscle your way out of anger. I mean, I think you can recognize the reality, and at the same time, what you're doing, and maybe this is probably what you meant, that at the same time that you've got to deal with the reality of your anger or of your circumstance, there's a spiritual letting go of your own desires and also plugging into the gifts that God has for us, the graces of the sacraments, the prayer, the
But that could be the discipline, because when we're angry, we're shutting down everything else. I mean, just understanding the way the brain works and you know, the secretions, all of a sudden we're just, everything is synapsing the wrong way. So let's set aside the moment of anger. Can we muscle spiritually our way through cultivating a deeper contemplation and real embracement and understanding of my, my need to understand redemption? Like I said, how do we flip that switch? Because ultimately, isn't that the goal of the church? Isn't that the goal of every pastor? To get people to flip that switch. Little by little, Sunday after Sunday homily, sacrament after sacrament, the church is constantly begging us. Do you see that question? Maybe it's not so unattainable.
One of the wisest things I ever heard. I think I said it. No. You never have to apologize for what you don't say. One of the ugly byproducts of anger is what we do, what we say. And then, if we calm down and if we have a conscience, we feel rotten. We feel guilty. We feel horrid. We wish we could take it back.
All back.
A routine piece of advice I give my clients. If you, at your peak moment of upset, when you feel like you're going to explode if you don't say something or punch something or do something, if you could just shut your mouth for 30 seconds, that's it, just 30 seconds is your goal, like you say, that flip the switch. There's a certain physiological relaxation that occurs, and you don't have the drive to explode. I play a lot of sports. My stupidest moments on the field or on the court have been when somebody's done something to me and I just I reacted. Later, I feel like a total idiot. I feel terrible. I so wish I didn't do that. If I could just hold it, even 10 seconds if I could just hold it. And so I practice that. That's that cultivating the habit. Second question, help me on this. You both got educated in college, and I'm sure you had your share of psychology counseling type courses. Do you remember this? Feelings are neither good nor bad, they just are.
They just are, sure.
What do you think about that? From a Catholic Christian perspective, what do you think about feelings are neither good nor bad? They just are.
Well, yeah, I guess,
being the lawyer, I would tend to make some distinctions here. And in terms of your emotions, I don't think your emotions themselves in terms of reactivity, there isn't a good or bad about that. But to the extent that a choice comes in,
and then a behavior
that's where
triggered.
sin comes in, when we're choosing
What
to
about
act.
envy?
Well, there's an intent.
But what about feelings
What's the
there's
intent?
hatred?
Yeah,
mean,
what
we're-
about,
Yeah, but that's...
are you saying entertaining the feeling?
Yeah, and you have to choose to do something. Just because something comes to you, you feel something in a flash, that's not sin. If you stay with that and you rev it up and you go
what
with
you're doing,
it.
though, Mary, is you've changed the terms now. Now you're
See,
saying
lawyers,
Yeah,
the action is neither good nor bad, it just is.
But see, I would disagree,
emotions are much
yeah.
broader than
Okay,
reaction.
okay, all right.
But I honestly, in healthy discussion, I would disagree, but we were duped. We were told that, so we became conditioned to that. Truthfully, the really holy people that we know, they aren't envious. They don't hate people.
I'm not saying envy is not a reaction.
But it's
I
a
think-
feeling.
Yeah, but
Jealousy,
jealousy,
feeling.
But really holy
You don't act on
people-
it? What if you don't act on it?
Yeah.
it depends. A thought that just comes to your mind is not a sin. The question is what you do with it. It can be a temptation. So that's the
See,
distinction
that's
I'm
not
drawing.
what they meant. You've changed the terms.
I put it
That's
in
not
Catholic
what they
terms.
meant.
I
They
put it in
meant
Catholic terms.
those emotions, those the anger, the resentment is neither good nor bad. It
Well,
just
the problem is,
Don't act on it.
The problem is it's very hard in real life not to feed those things, especially if you're starting from what you described of, well, I'm entitled. and here's my expectation of how people should treat me or what I'm entitled to. I'm envious of that because I'm entitled to have that Mercedes. So I'm going to just give in to that. Just because I think, wow, that's a nice Mercedes. I'd like to have that Mercedes. That's not the same as, I wish I had that Mercedes and she doesn't deserve it.
So see,
That's
what
where
you're
you're
saying
getting
is
into
now you're
envy.
throwing the cognitive component in, which is the feeling is there, the initial reaction, and I'm going to fuel it with my thoughts, which you're right, it broadens out the whole intent. But I always thought that that idea that feelings are neither good nor bad comes from a very, I don't want to say anti-moral perspective, but anti-virtue perspective, which is we're just these bundles of feelings and we have to be authentic to our own feelings and we have to acknowledge we're there. If you take it out further, here's the argument you get. Which is better? To be angry and express it, or to stuff it and develop an ulcer
Or neuroses.
or a neuroses? And I always would say there's a third option.
Right, those
Right.
aren't the two, you know.
Third option. And that's what you're talking about with theological, well, Catholic virtue.
But let's talk about the whole basis of moral theology. It is good. You know, there are things that are inherently good, which I think.
Well, your
is in-
emotions are not evil. I mean, Aquinas has a whole section on just your emotions and the
passions.
affective reality. But it's where, but again, maybe these are Catholic distinctions that psychology today has long since blown past. And that's probably a big part of that.
Well, I think it gets back to other topics that we've talked about here, whether we're talking about, you know, combating the culture or conquering the culture, whether we're talking about marriage. You know, we can't be duped by what was a lie.
Conventional wisdom.
You know, in one of the sessions, Ray, when you weren't here, we read from Ephesians, and Christ is very clear. St. Paul, you know, in this one, but Christ in the gospel as well. Don't be duped by lies. I mean, and yet we have been. You know, again, and I think we've been duped. These statistics show it. We've been duped by accepting anger. You know, again, as part of athleticism, part of the business world.
Well, you know,
part of family dynamics.
You mentioned the example of, well, I've got to express this anger, or you know, I'm going to stuff it and something wrong is going to. One of the interesting stats I came across recently was that those who continue to express their anger actually deepen it.
Exactly right.
So it gets worse the
Called
more you
emotional
think
rehearsal.
about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's what happens, and that puts that whole notion on its head, because it's not cathartic to get your anger out and to blow off at somebody. That's not cathartic at all. What it tends to do is form the habit. It's like water running in a channel. Pretty soon that's the easiest channel, and now I've run that channel so many times it doesn't take anything for me to lose it. Absolutely. Christ was the master psychologist. If he said forgive, then it must be good for us.
Right.
If he said don't hold on to it, then it must be good for us. If
don't
he
hold
said don't
grudges.
express it, then it must be good for us. And modern man, in his psychological wisdom, figured we know a lot more than he does. We'll come up with some new theories that work better, and we're finding out, and even psychologists learn these things after a while, we wouldn't attribute it to him, but he was right.
Well, Dr. Ray, we can't thank you enough for being our guest here on Parenting Today. Real life, real people, real problems. We're going to work on this anger. We're going to work on holiness. And we're going to tune in again.
I noticed
for our
you had a
next
little bit
series.
of twitch there just from the anger. I'm glad.
I'm
that-
working on it. Before it was a real problem.
Well, your
It's
producers
just
called me
down to
here
a
and
twitch.
basically said, can you spend a session or two with the both of them and just see if we can calm them down?
Yeah,
We
well,
want to
we're working on
remind
that.
our viewers to visit Dr. Ray's website, drray.com, and to hear more of his wisdom and guidance.
Thanks.
Thank you again.